I was working a temporary delivery route in a town about 2 hours east of where I lived. It was supposed to last 3 weeks. One of the regular drivers had broken his ankle stepping off a loading dock, and the company needed someone to cover his morning route until he could come back. I was single, had no kids, and I had done that kind of fill-in work before, so I took it. The pay was better than my usual route because they included mileage and a daily stipend. The only downside was the drive. If I tried to commute from home every day, I would have had to leave around 3 in the morning, which wasn't realistic. So I rented a room by the week. It wasn't a hotel exactly. It was one of those older roadside motels that had been turned into weekly rentals. Half the rooms still had the old number plates on the doors. The office had a faded sign for ice and vending machines, but the machines were gone. There were maybe 12 rooms total, all in a single row facing the parking lot. The place wasn't nice, but it wasn't terrible. The room had a bed, a small table, a microwave, a mini fridge, and a bathroom with a shower stall. The carpet had that damp old smell, but the sheets were clean, the lock worked, the parking lot had lights. That was enough for me. The woman at the front desk said most of the people staying there were workers, roofers, cable guys, truck drivers, people like that. She told me it was quiet during the week and a little louder on Fridays, but not to worry about it. I paid for 1 week up front. My routine was simple. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning, showered, drove to the depot, loaded the truck, and worked until sometime in the afternoon. After that, I'd get something cheap to eat, maybe stop at a gas station, then go back to the room and try to sleep early. I didn't know anyone in town. I didn't go out. I didn't even unpack much. I had a duffel bag, a cooler, 2 work uniforms, and a phone charger. For the first few nights, nothing happened. The motel was about as quiet as the woman had said. I heard trucks pulling in late, doors opening and closing, someone coughing in the room next to mine one night. A TV through the wall, but only faintly. The first strange thing happened on a Wednesday morning. I woke up before my alarm because I smelled food, not just a vague smell from outside. It was in the room. It smelled like someone had heated up leftovers, tomato sauce, maybe pasta, and something greasy. It was strong enough that I sat up and looked around before I was fully awake. The room was dark except for the red numbers on the microwave, 4:11. I remember that because I still had 19 minutes before my alarm. At first I thought it was coming through the vents, but the room didn't really have central air. It had one of those wall units under the window. It was turned off because the nights were cool. I looked at the microwave. It was closed. Nothing inside. The little turntable was empty. The mini fridge had my water bottles and a turkey sandwich from the gas station. That was it. I hadn't bought anything that could smell like that. I got up and checked outside. The parking lot was empty except for my car, a pickup with a ladder rack, and an old green SUV that had been there since I checked in. None of the room doors were open. Nobody was sitting outside. The smell faded while I was getting ready for work. By the time I left, it was mostly gone. I didn't think much of it. Old motels hold smells. Maybe somebody had cooked in the room before me. Maybe the microwave had something spilled inside that heated up when the room warmed. That was the explanation I gave myself. The next night, I stopped at a grocery store and bought a few things for the room. Bread, peanut butter, bananas, bottled water, and a pack of paper plates. I wanted to avoid eating gas station food every day. When I got back, I noticed the microwave clock was wrong. Not blinking, just wrong. It said 9:38. My phone said 6:52. I hadn't touched the microwave since I checked the inside that morning. I assumed there had been a power flicker, but the bedside alarm clock was still correct. So was the clock on the wall unit. That bothered me a little, but not enough to do anything. I reset the microwave, made a peanut butter sandwich, and went to bed around 8. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a beep. Just one. It was the sound microwaves make when they finish. I didn't move right away. I was in that confused half-sleep where you understand what you heard, but your body hasn't caught up yet. A few seconds passed. Then I heard another sound. A soft click, like the microwave door opening. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. I could see the outline of the microwave on the small table near the foot of the bed. The display was glowing. There was no one standing there. I lay still and listened. The only sound was the wall unit ticking as it cooled down. I reached over and turned on the lamp. The microwave door was closed. The time on it said 2:16. I got out of bed and walked over to it. I remember feeling annoyed more than scared. I thought maybe the microwave was malfunctioning, or maybe I had dreamed the beep. I opened it. Empty, but the inside was warm. Not hot. Not like something had just been cooked for 5 minutes. Just warm enough that I noticed it when I put my hand inside. I stood there for a while with my hand in the microwave, feeling stupid. Then I unplugged it. The smell came back the next morning. This time it smelled like breakfast. Eggs, maybe. Some kind of meat. I woke up around 4, and it was in the room again. The microwave was still unplugged. The door was closed. I checked the fridge. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been moved that I could tell. My loaf of bread was still clipped shut. The bananas were still on top of the fridge. I checked the door. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was on. I also checked the bathroom window, even though I already knew it didn't open. It was a small frosted glass window high on the wall above the shower. It had been painted shut years before. I showered and went to work feeling tired and irritated. That day, I asked the woman at the front desk if anyone had access to the rooms besides housekeeping. She looked at me like the question bothered her. She said housekeeping only came in after checkout unless you requested it. Then she said maintenance had keys, but he didn't go in rooms unless something was called in. I told her I thought someone had been in my room. She asked if anything was missing. I said no. She asked if there were signs of forced entry. I said no. She told me the locks were old but solid, and then she said, sometimes the guys forget they left food in the microwave. I told her I hadn't used the microwave for anything. She didn't really respond to that. She just said she could move me to another room if one opened up, but they were full through the weekend. I thanked her and left it alone. That evening, I bought one of those rubber door wedges from a hardware store. I also bought a cheap motion sensor light, the kind people use in closets. It ran on batteries and stuck to the wall with adhesive strips. Back in the room, I put the wedge under the door. Then I set a chair against the door too, angled under the knob. It was not some clever trap. I just wanted to know if anyone opened the door while I was asleep. I put the motion light on the small table facing the entrance. If the door opened, I figured the light would turn on. Then I lay down. I didn't sleep well. Every sound woke me up. Tires on gravel, a truck door closing, pipes knocking in the wall. Twice I turned on the lamp and looked around. Nothing had moved. At some point after 2, I finally slept. When I woke up, the room smelled like food again. Not faint, strong. It smelled like chicken noodle soup, salty broth, onions, pepper, the kind that comes in a can. The first thing I looked at was the chair. It was still wedged under the door handle. The rubber doorstop was still under the door. The motion light had not come on. The door was locked. The chain was still hooked. For a few seconds I felt relieved. Then I noticed the bathroom. The bathroom door was open the way I had left it. From the bed I could see part of the sink and the wall above it. There was an attic hatch in the ceiling above the bathroom. I had noticed it the first day without really thinking about it. A square piece of painted plywood, maybe 2 feet wide, with a small gap on one side where the paint had cracked. That morning it was open. Not all the way, just enough that one edge had lifted, leaving a thin black line above the panel. I stared at it for a long time before I got out of bed. The smell was strongest near the bathroom. I stood in the doorway and looked up. The hatch had been pushed up maybe half an inch. Not much, just enough that there was darkness behind it. I didn't touch it. I left the room and went to the office as soon as it opened. This time I didn't ask if someone had entered my room. I told the woman the attic hatch was open. Her face changed when I said that. Not dramatically. She didn't gasp or anything, but she stopped doing what she was doing and looked at me. She asked, "Which room are you in again?" I told her. She called someone named Dennis from the phone behind the desk. She kept her voice low, but I could hear parts of it. She said my room number, she said, the access panel. Then she said, "No, he's standing right here." Dennis showed up about 20 minutes later in a white van with no markings. He was probably in his 60s. Thin, gray hair, work boots, cigarette smell. He didn't introduce himself. He just asked for my key and walked toward my room. I followed him. He took one look at the hatch and said, "That shouldn't be open." Then he got a step stool from his van and pushed the panel up. I expected dust and insulation, maybe wires. Instead, I saw empty space. It wasn't exactly an attic. It was more like a crawl space running above the row of rooms. Low clearance, unfinished wood, old insulation, pipes, electrical lines. Dennis shined a flashlight inside and climbed up enough to get his head and shoulders through. He stayed that way for maybe 30 seconds. Then he climbed down and said, "No sign of anybody," but he didn't sound confident. I asked him if someone could move between rooms up there. He said no. Then he said, "Not easily." That answer stuck with me. I asked what that meant. He said there were fire breaks between units, plywood barriers every so often, and that some of them had been cut into over the years for repairs. He said there was no reason for anyone to be up there unless they were working. I asked if there was another access point. He said there were a few, one above the laundry room, one in the maintenance closet, maybe one in the end unit, if it hadn't been sealed. Then he said he'd screw my panel shut. He went to his van, came back with a drill, and put 2 long screws through the plywood into the ceiling frame. He pulled on it afterward to show me it wouldn't open. The woman at the desk moved me the next day. A roofer checked out early and she put me in room 3, closer to the office. My old room had been 9. I told myself that was the end of it. Room 3 smelled different, more like cleaning supplies and old smoke. It didn't have an attic hatch in the bathroom, at least not one I could see. The ceiling was lower, and there was a vent fan that didn't work. I slept better that night. No food smell, no microwave beeping. The next few days were normal enough that I started feeling embarrassed about how much the whole thing had gotten to me. I decided it was probably maintenance. Maybe Dennis or someone else had gone into the crawl space, opened the wrong hatch, and left it cracked. The food smell could have been from another room traveling through the ceiling. Not a perfect explanation, but close enough to sleep. On Friday, I got back from work earlier than usual. It had rained all morning, and half the deliveries had been delayed until the next day. I parked outside room 3 and sat in the car for a minute finishing a phone call with my dispatcher. While I was sitting there, I noticed a man standing near room 9. He was not doing anything strange. He was just standing there with a plastic grocery bag in one hand. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s, average height, brown jacket, baseball cap. He had a gray beard that looked untrimmed but not wild. If I had seen him anywhere else, I would have assumed he was another weekly renter. He looked at my old door for a moment. Then he walked away from it and went around the far end of the building. There was no sidewalk back there, just a narrow strip of grass and a chain-link fence separating the property from a drainage ditch. I stayed in the car and watched, but he didn't come back around. I don't know why I didn't tell anyone right then. I think I was tired of being the guy complaining about smells and noises. I went into my room, showered, and sat on the bed eating a sandwich. Maybe 20 minutes later I heard a thump above me, not loud. More like a knee or elbow shifting weight on wood. I looked at the ceiling. Room 3 wasn't supposed to have access. I turned off the TV. There was another sound, a slow scrape. Then, nothing. I stood on the bed and pushed on the ceiling tiles with my hand. They weren't tiles, just painted drywall. Solid. I listened for a long time. Nothing. That night, I slept with the light on. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up because someone was talking. At first I thought it was outside. Then I realized it was above me. A man's voice, muffled, too quiet to understand. It was not a full conversation, more like someone speaking to himself in short sentences. I held my breath and listened. I caught one word. Heat. Then a pause. Then something that sounded like, "No, not that one." I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. No one answered. I called again. Still no answer. The office closed at 9, and the woman had told me there was an emergency number taped inside the office window, but I didn't have it saved. The voice stopped. For a while there was only silence. Then I heard something small drop behind the bathroom wall. A tap, then a sliding sound, like a coin or screw falling down inside the space between studs. I left the room. I didn't pack. I didn't put on my work boots. I just grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone and went to my car and socks. I drove to the 24-hour gas station down the road and sat in the parking lot until the sun came up. At 6:30, I went back. There were 2 police cars in the motel lot. For a second, I thought someone had called because of me, but the cars were parked at the far end, near room 11 and the maintenance closet. The woman from the front desk was standing outside with Dennis. She looked pale and angry. One officer was talking to a man I recognized as the roofer who had checked out. Another officer was standing by the end of the building, looking at the ground. I walked up and asked what happened. The woman didn't answer me. Dennis looked at me, then looked away. One of the officers asked if I was staying there. I told him my room number. He asked if I had seen anyone around the building the day before. I told him about the man with the grocery bag near room 9. He asked me to describe him. I did. He wrote it down, but his face didn't change. Then he asked if anything had happened in my room. I told him everything. The smell of food, the microwave, the chair, the attic hatch, the voice above room 3. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked if I had taken any pictures. I said no. Then he asked if I still had the room key. I gave it to him. They would not let me go back inside right away. I sat on the curb near the office while they went in and out of rooms. At some point, another maintenance guy showed up, then another police car. After about an hour, the officer came back and told me I should find somewhere else to stay. I asked him if someone had been living above the rooms. He said they were still figuring out what happened. I asked if I was in danger. He didn't answer directly. He said, "I wouldn't sleep here tonight. That was enough. They let me into room 3 with an officer so I could get my stuff." Nothing looked disturbed. My duffel bag was still by the dresser. My work shirts were still hanging from the shower rod. The sandwich wrapper from the night before was in the trash, but the room smelled like soup. I noticed it as soon as I walked in. So did the officer. He didn't say anything, but he looked toward the bathroom. I packed fast. While I was unplugging my phone charger, I saw something on the floor under the table. A grocery receipt. It was folded once and slightly damp, like it had been carried in a pocket. I knew it wasn't mine because I kept my receipts in the car for reimbursement. I picked it up before thinking. The officer saw me and asked what it was. I handed it to him. It was from a supermarket about a mile away. The date was the day before. The items were ordinary: canned soup, plastic spoons, a pack of bologna, 2 microwave dinners, a small roll of duct tape. The officer put it in a plastic bag. That was the last thing I saw before I left. I moved to a chain hotel near the interstate for the rest of the route. It cost more than the stipend covered, but I didn't care. I slept with the TV on and a towel pushed under the door for the next 10 nights. Nobody from the motel ever called me. The police called once, about a week later, to ask a few more questions. The officer asked again if I could identify the man I saw near room 9. I told him maybe. But I had only seen him for a few seconds from inside my car. I asked if they found him. The officer said they had spoken to a person of interest but couldn't give details. I asked if the person had been staying in the crawl space. He paused before answering. Then he said, "There were signs someone had been up there." That was all he would say. I finished the temporary route and went home. For a while I checked local news sites, expecting to see something about it. A trespasser found in motel attic. A man arrested for breaking into rooms. Something. I never found anything. A few months later, I drove through that town again on my way to visit my brother. I didn't plan to stop at the motel, but I passed it on the road and slowed down without meaning to. The sign was still there. The office was dark. There were only 2 cars in the lot. Room 9 had plywood over the window. Room 3 looked normal. I kept driving. I don't know who was above those rooms. I don't know how long he had been there. I don't know if he entered my room through the bathroom hatch, or if he only opened it to look down. I don't know if the food smells came from him cooking up there somehow, or if he was using microwaves in empty rooms and moving through the crawl space afterward. The part I still think about most is the chair. That morning, after I blocked the door, I woke up feeling like I had proved something. The chair was still there. The wedge was still in place. Nobody had come through the door. And then I saw the hatch, that thin line of darkness above the bathroom. It wasn't open wide. It didn't have to be. It was just enough to show me that I had been watching the wrong entrance. I was working drywall on a hotel remodel outside Dayton when this happened. Not a nice hotel. Not the kind with a lobby bar or conference rooms. This was one of those older weekly rate motels off the service road between a used tire place and a closed-down buffet. 2 stories, outside walkways. Ice machine that sounded like it was dying. A pool with no water in it. Most of the rooms were rented by the week. Some by the month. A few of the people there looked like they had been there much longer than that. I wasn't in a position to be picky. Our company had 3 weeks of work on a site about 15 minutes away, and the per diem wasn't great. The other guys found a place together across town, but I didn't know them well enough to share a room, and I don't sleep good around other people. So I took a single room at the Oak Bend Motor Lodge. That wasn't really a lodge. There were no oak trees either. My room was 214, second floor, near the end of the building. The woman at the front desk was in her late 50s, maybe older, with short dyed red hair and glasses on a chain. She gave me 1 key card and told me the room was non-smoking. She said that like she expected me to argue. I told her I didn't smoke. She said, "Good. We charge $200 if it smells like smoke." That stuck in my head later, because the first thing I noticed when I opened the door was the smell. Not in the whole room. The room smelled like motel cleaner, old carpet, and the little lemon deodorizer disc they put in the wall unit, but near the closet there was a strong cigarette smell. Stale cigarettes. Not like somebody had smoked one recently. More like an ashtray that had been sitting in a car for a month. The closet was just inside the door on the right. 2 sliding mirror panels, one of them cracked in the corner. No light inside, a wooden bar with a few mismatched hangers. A high shelf. Carpet continuing from the room into the closet. I stood there with my duffel over my shoulder and opened both doors. The smell got stronger right away. I leaned in and looked around. Nothing. No cigarette butts. No burn marks I could see. No ash. I checked the shelf with my phone flashlight. Empty. I checked the floor. Empty. I remember thinking maybe the last guy had smoked in there with the bathroom fan on, trying not to get caught. I put my duffel on the bed, went back downstairs and told the front desk. The woman didn't look surprised. She said, "Did you smoke in it?" I said, "I just got here." She looked at the clock behind her and said housekeeping had already left. I told her I just didn't want to get charged for it. She wrote something on a sticky note and stuck it to the monitor. Room 214, smoke smell in closet. Then she said, "There, you're covered." That was all I wanted, so I went back up. I had been up since 4:30 that morning. I wasn't looking for problems. I unpacked just enough to get by. Work clothes in the top drawer, toiletries in the bathroom, cooler by the little fridge, boots near the door because they were muddy from the site. I kept the closet open a few inches, hoping it would air out. Then I showered, ate a gas station sandwich, watched half an episode of some old crime show, and fell asleep with the TV still on. The next morning was normal. I left around 6. When I work out of town, I have a routine. I make coffee in the little motel coffee maker if it doesn't look too disgusting. I pack a lunch. Usually 2 sandwiches, a banana, and a couple bottles of water in a small cooler bag. I put my wallet in my right front pocket, room key in my left, phone in the side pocket of my pants. I'm not a neat freak, but when I'm living out of a bag, I keep things in the same places. That morning I set my boots straight by the door, toes pointing toward the wall, because I sat on the bed to lace them. I remember that because one of the laces had started to fray. I worked a 10-hour day hanging board in a new dentist office. Hot, dusty, nothing unusual. I got back to the motel a little after 5. The room looked the same at first. Bed unmade. Bathroom door open. Curtains closed except for a little gap, but my boots were turned around. Both of them. They were still by the door, but now the toes were pointing toward the room door, like somebody had set them there so they'd be ready to put on and leave. I stood there for a second with my hand still on the door handle. It wasn't impossible that I'd done it. You forget things when you're tired. Maybe I had taken them off facing the other way the night before and remembered it wrong, but I had worn them that day. I had sat on the bed, tied the frayed lace, and left. Still, I didn't let myself make anything out of it. I checked my bag. Nothing missing. Checked my wallet. Cash still there. Tools were in my truck, not in the room. I checked the closet. The cigarette smell was still there. Stronger, maybe, because the room had been shut up all day. Nothing inside. I shut the closet doors that night, not all the way. Just enough so I didn't have to look at the dark gap while I was trying to sleep. The next morning, I did the same routine. Coffee. Lunch. Boots. Out by 6. I worked until 4:30 and stopped at a grocery store on the way back. I bought a frozen dinner, a 6-pack of bottled tea, and a roll of blue painter's tape, because I needed some for labeling drywall cuts the next day. When I got back to the room, the smell hit me before I even opened the closet. That stale cigarette smell was in the room now, not heavy, but there. I set the grocery bag on the dresser. The TV was on, volume low, local news. I hadn't turned it on that morning. I knew I hadn't, because I don't turn on the TV before work. I don't like hearing people talk first thing in the morning. The remote was sitting on the nightstand, exactly where I usually left it. For a minute, I just listened. A woman on the news was talking about road closures downtown. Then it cut to weather. I walked over and turned the TV off. The screen went black, and the room felt different, not haunted. I don't mean that. It felt occupied, like the air had been disturbed. I checked the door. The chain lock was hanging loose, of course, because you can only set it from inside. The deadbolt was not turned. The latch plate looked fine. No damage around the frame. I opened the closet again. The smell came out thick and sour. I moved the hangers aside. I checked the shelf. Then I got down on one knee and pressed around the walls with my hand. The closet shared a wall with the bathroom on one side and the next room on the other. The back wall would have faced the exterior walkway, I think, or maybe the stairwell side. I didn't know the layout well enough. The walls were thin, cheap drywall with old paint. No panel or access door. I pushed on them anyway. Nothing moved. I checked under the bed. Nothing but dust, a plastic fork, and a beer cap. I opened every drawer empty except my clothes. I checked behind the curtains. I even looked above the bathroom ceiling tile, because some places have drop ceilings. This one didn't, just painted drywall with a fan that rattled when it ran. After that I went downstairs again. The red-haired woman wasn't there. A younger guy was at the desk, maybe early 20s, watching something on his phone. I told him I thought housekeeping had been in my room. He said housekeeping only came on Tuesdays unless you asked. It was Wednesday. I said my TV had been on when I got back. He asked if I was sure I didn't leave it on. I said I was sure. He shrugged and said the remotes sometimes did weird things. I asked if anyone else had a key. He said the front desk had master keys and housekeeping had a cart key, but nobody had been up there that day as far as he knew. As far as you know? I said. He looked annoyed. Then he said, "We got cameras on the stairs if you want me to check." I said yes. He went into the back office for maybe 2 minutes. When he came out, he said he didn't see anyone go to my room except me. I asked if I could see. He said guests weren't allowed in the office. I should have pushed harder, but I was tired, and he looked like he wanted me gone, so I went back up. That night I put the chair under the door handle. It was a cheap motel chair with wooden arms and a stained cushion. It wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted to get in, but it would make noise. I also left the bathroom light on. I didn't sleep much. Every time the wall unit clicked on, I opened my eyes. Every time someone walked along the outside walkway, the room shook a little. Around 2 in the morning, I smelled cigarette smoke. Fresh. Not the old closet smell. This was sharper, like somebody had just taken a drag outside the door. I sat up. The chair was still wedged under the handle. The curtains were closed. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. The smell faded after a few minutes. In the morning I told myself someone outside had probably been smoking and the wall unit pulled it in. That was reasonable. The wall unit was right below the window. People smoked outside rooms at cheap motels all the time, even if the rooms were non-smoking. I didn't want to become the guy who sees a mystery in everything, so I went to work. That day I brought my lunch into the room after work and noticed something before I even set down my tool belt. My cooler bag was on the desk. I had left it on top of the mini fridge. The zipper was open halfway. Inside, one of the sandwich bags had been opened. Not eaten, just opened. The top piece of bread was lifted like somebody had checked what was in it and put it back. The banana was still there. The water bottles were still there. Nothing was missing. That bothered me more than if someone had stolen something. A thief takes cash. A hungry person eats the sandwich. This was someone looking, or letting me know they had looked. I stood by the desk for a long time. Then I went room to room again, even though there was only one room, closet, bathroom. Under bed, behind curtains, nothing. I called the front desk from the room phone. The young guy answered. I told him someone had been in my room. He said, "Sir, we checked the cameras yesterday." I said, "Check them again." He sighed loudly enough that I heard it through the phone. Then he said the manager wasn't there and he couldn't leave the desk. I asked for a different room. He said they were full. I knew that was probably a lie. Half the parking lot was empty. But arguing over a motel phone wasn't getting me anywhere. I hung up. Then I sat on the bed, still in my dusty clothes, and looked at the closet. The mirror doors reflected the room back at me in a warped way because of the crack and the cheap glass. My boots were near the door. The TV was off. The cooler bag sat open on the desk. The closet smelled like cigarettes. That was when I noticed the bottom track of the closet door. There was a dark line in the dust. Not a footprint. Not exactly. More like the carpet right in front of the closet had been pressed down in a narrow strip. I hadn't noticed it before. It ran from the closet to the edge of the bed, then disappeared into the heavier wear of the carpet. I'm not saying it was a trail. It could have been from my duffel. Could have been from housekeeping. Could have been anything, but I didn't like it. I decided I wasn't sleeping there another night without doing something. I didn't have cameras. I didn't have any kind of alarm. I wasn't going to stay awake all night with a hammer in my hand, because I had work in the morning and I wasn't trying to get arrested, so I used the painter's tape. First, I put a little piece across the top of the room door and the frame before I went down to get dinner. I knew it would break if someone opened the door from outside. Then I put another tiny piece on one dresser drawer. Another on the bathroom door. Then I stood in front of the closet and thought about it. If someone was coming in through the room door, the tape there would tell me. If housekeeping or the front desk came in, same thing. But the closet bothered me in a different way. I kept coming back to the smell. It was strongest with the closet closed. It wasn't just lingering in fabric or carpet. It felt like it was being kept in there. I slid the closet doors open. The inside was empty like always. I got on my hands and knees again, shined my phone light around, and pressed all along the back wall. Nothing. I pressed the side wall. Nothing. I tapped lightly. It sounded hollow in some places, but all motel walls sound hollow. Then I noticed something about the right-hand wall. Near the floor, behind where the sliding mirror door overlapped, the paint had a faint vertical seam. It was about 2 feet tall, very thin. Not a door, not anything obvious, just a line where the texture didn't quite match. I pushed on it. It didn't move. I ran my finger along it and got dust under my nail. I told myself it was just a drywall patch, maybe an old plumbing repair. Maybe damage from years ago, but I didn't like standing inside that closet. The smell was strong enough to make my throat feel coated. I stepped back out. Then I did something that sounds stupid when I say it now. I took a strip of blue painter's tape about 8 inches long and stuck it across the inside of the closet door. Not outside, inside. I slid one mirrored door almost closed, then reached in and stuck the tape from the inside edge of the moving door to the inside wall of the closet. It wasn't visible from the room unless you opened the door. The idea was simple. If the door was opened from the room, the tape would probably peel loose or wrinkle outward. If the door moved from inside the closet, the tape would snap or pull inward. I don't know why I made that distinction. I just did. I also put a small piece of tape low across the seam I had noticed in the right wall. Then I closed the closet doors until they met in the middle. After that I left. I went to a diner half a mile away and sat in a booth by myself. I ordered meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and coffee. I remember almost nothing about the meal except that I kept checking the time. I was gone for 51 minutes. I know that because I looked at my phone when I left the motel room, and again when I pulled back into the parking lot. It was just after 7 when I got back. There were a few people outside. A man in a sleeveless shirt smoking near the stairs, a woman carrying laundry in a plastic basket, 2 kids sitting on the curb with a tablet between them. Normal motel stuff. My room door tape was still intact. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. The little strip of blue tape stretched from the door to the frame, unbroken. No one had opened the door. I unlocked it carefully and pushed inside. The tape tore because I opened the door. The chair wasn't under the handle because I had left it by the table. The room was quiet, TV off. Bathroom light still on. Nothing looked different. Then I smelled smoke, fresh smoke, not heavy, but present. Like someone had put out a cigarette right before I came in. I shut the door behind me and stood still. I didn't call out. That always seems fake to me when people call out in stories. If somebody was in there, I didn't want to announce exactly where I was standing. I checked the bathroom first. Empty, shower curtain pulled back, no one behind the door. Then I checked under the bed. Empty. The room was so small there weren't many places left. I looked at the closet. The mirror doors were closed. The crack in the corner of the left panel caught the bathroom light and made a little white line. I walked over, slowly. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, because my legs felt heavy. I put my fingers on the edge of the closet door and slid it open. The smell came out immediately. The blue tape across the inside of the door was broken, not peeled. Broken. The 2 ends were still stuck where I had put them, one on the inside edge of the sliding door, one on the inner wall. The middle had torn. The torn ends bent inward toward the closet. I stared at it for a while. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then I looked down. The small piece of tape I had placed across the faint seam in the right wall was no longer flat. One side was still stuck. The other side had lifted. Behind it, the seam looked wider than before. Only a little. Maybe the thickness of a coin. I took one step back. Then another. I didn't want to turn my back on it, so I backed all the way to the room door. I grabbed my wallet and keys from the dresser. I didn't grab my clothes. I didn't grab my cooler. I didn't grab my phone charger. I opened the door and stepped outside. There were still people around, which helped. The man in the sleeveless shirt was still smoking by the stairs. He looked over at me. I said, "Hey, can you come here for a second?" He didn't move at first. I said, "I think someone's in my room." That got his attention. He came over slowly, cigarette between his fingers. He was maybe 40, with gray in his beard and paint on his jeans. He looked like another worker. I pointed at the closet from the doorway. I told him I didn't want to go back in alone. He looked at me for a second, then looked into the room. He said, "You call the office?" I said, "Not yet." He handed me his cigarette like he needed both hands free, then thought better of it and dropped it into a soda can by the railing. We went in together. He checked the closet. He was braver than me, or maybe just less invested. He slid the doors open hard enough that they rattled. He looked inside and said, "Nobody." I showed him the tape. He looked at it, leaned closer, then looked at the wall seam. He pressed on the wall with his palm. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. There was a soft click, not loud, just enough that both of us heard it. The lower section of the wall shifted inward maybe half an inch. He took his hand away fast. We looked at each other, then he pressed again, this time near the top of the seam. The panel opened inward. It wasn't a full door. It was a cut piece of drywall or thin paneling, painted to match, hinged or maybe just fitted somehow. Behind it was a dark space. Not a room. A narrow cavity, maybe 18 inches wide. It ran behind the closet wall and continued to the side, toward the neighboring room. The smell that came out made both of us step back. Cigarettes. Sweat. Old clothes. Something damp. He said, "Jesus." I used my phone light. Inside, there were cigarette butts in a plastic cup, a crushed water bottle, a gray sweatshirt, a fast food wrapper, a pair of cheap black gloves, and a little flattened area in the dust where someone had clearly been sitting or crouching. The space was too tight for a person to live in comfortably, but a person could fit. A small person or someone willing to squeeze. The cavity seemed to connect to something on the other side. I could see a dark gap at the far end, but not where it went. The man said, "Back out." I did. We left the room and went downstairs to the office. This time the red-haired woman was there. I told her there was a crawl space behind my closet and that somebody had been in it. She looked at me like I had slapped her. Not scared. Angry, she said, "That's not possible." The man who came with me said, "It's possible, I saw it." Then she got scared. She called someone. Maybe the owner. Maybe maintenance. Then she called the police, but only after I said I was going to. 2 officers came about 20 minutes later. They went into the room. They looked at the closet. They opened the panel. One of them was thin enough to lean halfway in with a flashlight. He said the space ran between rooms and down to some kind of utility chase near the end of the building. The motel had been renovated badly over the years. Old maintenance access patched over in some rooms, ignored in others. They checked the neighboring rooms. The room to my right was supposedly vacant. The room on the other side was occupied by a man who said he had been sleeping. The vacant room had an access panel behind its closet too, but it had been screwed shut from the room side. The screws were old. The officer said someone could have entered the wall space from the utility area instead. They searched that too. They didn't find anyone. At least not while I was there. The red-haired woman kept saying she didn't know. She said maintenance must have left it like that. She said no one had complained before. Maybe that was true. Maybe people had complained and then left. The police took the sweatshirt, the gloves, and the water bottle. They asked me what was missing. I said nothing. They asked if I was sure. I said I was sure. That seemed to make the whole thing less important. If nothing was stolen, and no one was assaulted, and no one was found, then it became a trespassing issue, or a possible prowler, or maybe just a maintenance problem. One officer told me to find another place to stay. He didn't say it unkindly. He just said, "I wouldn't sleep here tonight." I didn't. I packed my things while the officers were still there. My clothes smelled like cigarettes even though they had been in the dresser. My lunch was still open on the desk. The TV remote was still on the nightstand. When I picked up my boots, I noticed something inside the left one. A cigarette filter, just the filter, no paper, no tobacco. It was pressed down into the toe like it had been pushed there with a finger. I showed it to one of the officers. He looked at it, then dropped it into a small paper evidence bag. He asked if I smoked. I said no. He wrote that down. I drove to the motel where the other guys were staying and slept on the floor of their room for 2 nights. Then I paid too much for a different place near the highway. The police called me once about a week later. They said they hadn't identified anyone. They said the motel owner claimed the utility access door had a broken latch and that it had been repaired. They asked if I wanted my statement amended or if I remembered anything else. I told them about the smell, the TV, the lunch, the boots, the tape. The officer listened, but I could tell he had heard enough. Before he hung up, he said, "You did the right thing leaving." That was the last official thing I heard about it. I looked up the motel a few months later. Still open, same name, same pictures online. Some reviews mentioned dirty rooms and bad service. One review, written after I stayed there, said their room smelled like smoke even though it was non-smoking. Another said they heard scratching in the wall at night. But reviews are like that. People exaggerate. People complain. I try not to think about what would have happened if I hadn't bought that tape. Or if I had gone to sleep with the chair under the door and the closet closed. The part I still don't understand is the TV. The wall space didn't open into the room except through the closet. Whoever was in there would have had to slide the closet door open, step out, turn on the TV, and go back in. That means they weren't just hiding. They were coming out when I was gone. Maybe while I slept. I also don't understand the boots. Turning them toward the door felt too deliberate. Like a suggestion. Like whoever it was wanted me to leave. Or wanted me to know they could move things without taking anything. The cigarette filter in the boot was worse. That was personal. That meant they had held my boot, reached inside it, and pushed that filter all the way down where my toes would go in the morning. I don't know how many times they had been in the room. I don't know if they watched me through the crack in the closet doors. I don't know if they were in the wall the first night, when I stood there unpacking and complaining about the smoke smell. I only know that the tape broke from the inside. And when I close a closet now, I always check it twice. Not because I believe in anything supernatural. I don't. I check because some spaces in old buildings are bigger than they look. And because sometimes a room can be empty, but not completely. I had worked 16 hours that day. It was supposed to be a regular 12-hour night shift, 7 at night to 7 in the morning, but one of the day nurses called out sick, and they were already short on the med-surg floor. I should have said no. I knew I should have said no, but anyone who has worked in a hospital knows how that conversation goes. You're already there. You're already tired. And someone looks at you like you're the only thing standing between the floor functioning or falling apart. So I stayed. By the time I clocked out, it was a little after 11 in the morning. I had been awake for more than 24 hours, except for maybe 10 minutes in the break room where I sat with my eyes closed and a half-eaten granola bar in my hand. I remember standing in the employee parking lot and just looking at my car for a second before getting in. It was an older Honda Civic, nothing special. It had over 200,000 miles on it, but it had always been reliable enough. I lived about an hour and 20 minutes from the hospital, mostly back roads and two-lane highway. Usually I liked that drive after a shift. It gave me time to stop feeling like I was still inside the hospital. That day, I just wanted to be home. About 40 minutes into the drive, the temperature gauge started climbing. At first I thought I was imagining it. I was exhausted, and the sun was in that bright white part of late morning where everything looks washed out. But then the warning light came on. I pulled onto the shoulder and turned the heat all the way up, because that's what my dad had always told me to do if a car started overheating. Hot air blasted into my face. The gauge dropped for maybe a minute, then started going back up. There wasn't much around, just pine trees, a few old houses set far back from the road, and the occasional gas station that looked like it had been there since the 70s. I limped the car another mile or two until I saw a motel sign ahead. It was one of those small roadside places with a gravel lot, 10 or 12 rooms in a row, and an office attached to the owner's house. The sign said "Vacancy" in red letters. Under it, someone had hung a smaller sign that said "Weekly Rates." I pulled in because I didn't have another option. When I got out, steam was coming from under the hood. Not a lot, but enough that I knew I wasn't driving it farther without making things worse. I called roadside assistance, and they told me it would be 2 to 3 hours before anyone could get out there. I knew I wasn't safe to keep driving, even if the car cooled down. I was too tired. So I went into the office and asked if they had a room for the day. The man at the desk was probably in his late 50s. He had a gray mustache and a sweatshirt with the motel's name on it. He didn't seem surprised by anything I said. He just asked if I wanted one bed or two and if I was paying cash or card. I told him I only needed a few hours to sleep. He nodded and said checkout was at 11 the next morning, but if I was gone before then, I could just drop the key in the box. It wasn't a key card. It was an actual metal key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. Room 6. I remember that because, for some reason, I didn't like the number. Not because it meant anything, it just felt like the kind of room number you get when nobody cares where they put you. The room was 2 doors down from the office. I parked directly in front of it, grabbed my backpack, my water bottle, and the fast food bag I'd picked up on the way out of town but hadn't eaten from. Then I let myself in. The room looked normal, clean enough. Not nice, but not dirty. 2 double beds with brown comforters. A small table by the window. A TV mounted on the wall. A mini fridge humming in the corner. That standard motel smell of old carpet, bleach, and air freshener. I did what I always do in hotel rooms. I checked the lock, then the chain, then the bathroom, then behind the curtains. I wasn't paranoid exactly. Working nights makes you practical. You learn that most bad things don't announce themselves. You also learn that if something feels off, it's better to check it once than tell yourself you're being silly. Nothing looked wrong. The bathroom was small. Sink outside, toilet and tub inside. White towels. Little wrapped soap. Plastic cups sealed in thin bags. The bathroom window was high on the wall, the kind with frosted glass and a crank handle. It was shut. I tried the latch and it didn't move. I took my shoes off, washed my hands, and ate half of a cold chicken sandwich sitting on the edge of the bed. That's when I noticed the towel. There were 2 bath towels on the rack over the toilet. One was folded the way motel towels usually are. Flat and square. The other looked like someone had taken it down, used it, and then folded it back up in a hurry. It wasn't hanging loose. It had been put back carefully, but the edges didn't line up. I touched it. It was damp, not soaked, just wet enough that the cotton felt heavy in one spot. I stood there with my hand on it for a second. Then I looked at the sink. No water on the counter. No hair. No obvious mess. I told myself housekeeping had probably wiped something down and used the towel by mistake, or maybe the last guest had showered right before checkout and the towel didn't dry before the room was cleaned. I had spent years working in hospitals. I knew rooms could look clean and still have things missed. I also knew fatigue made small things feel bigger. So I took the damp towel off the rack, put it on the floor by the tub, and grabbed the dry one. I brushed my teeth using bottled water from my bag because the tap had that rusty roadside motel taste. When I came back out, I pulled the blackout curtains closed and plugged my phone into the outlet behind the nightstand. That was when I saw the charger. It was tucked behind the nightstand, half hidden between the bed and the wall. Not the block, just the cord. A white phone charger wound loosely around itself, like someone had shoved it there with their foot or reached behind the stand and left it. I stared at it longer than I should have. Again, I told myself housekeeping missed it. That was reasonable. People forget chargers all the time. I have a drawer at home with 3 chargers that I'm pretty sure came from patients or coworkers or rooms I've stayed in over the years. I didn't touch it. I plugged my own charger into a different outlet and set my phone on the nightstand. Then I checked the lock again. Deadbolt. Chain. Curtains. I called the tow company and gave them the motel address. They said they'd call me when the driver was close. I asked if they could take the car to the repair shop in the town where I lived, and they said it depended on distance, but the driver would discuss it with me. I was too tired to argue. I set my alarm for 4 in the afternoon, thinking I'd sleep for a few hours, deal with the car, and maybe get a ride home from my sister after she got off work. Before lying down, I opened the drawer in the nightstand to look for a Bible. I don't know why. I'm not especially religious. I think it was just habit. Most motel rooms have one, and I wanted to see if the place was as ordinary as it looked. There was no Bible. There was a water bottle. It was tucked toward the back of the drawer, behind the folded card with the TV channel list. Half full. The cap was on, but not tightly. When I picked it up, a little water moved around inside. It wasn't old. There was no dust on it. The label was still smooth, and the bottle had not collapsed the way old plastic bottles do when they sit around in heat. That was the first time I felt something in my chest that I couldn't explain away as easily. A damp towel could be missed. A charger could be forgotten. A half-finished water bottle hidden inside a drawer felt different. I carried it to the trash can and stood there holding it. Then I walked to the door, opened it, and looked outside. The lot was quiet. A white pickup was parked at the far end, in front of room 10. There was a dark green sedan near the office. My car sat in front of my door with the hood still raised. Across the road, there was a closed diner with weeds growing through the parking lot. No one was outside. I shut the door and locked it again. I thought about going back to the office and asking for another room, but I was embarrassed. That sounds stupid now, but at the time, I could already hear myself explaining it. There was a towel and a charger and a water bottle. None of that proves anything. And I was a nurse who had just worked a double shift. I could almost see the look the man at the front desk would give me. Polite, maybe concerned, but mostly tired. So I threw the bottle away, set my phone volume high, and lay down on top of the bedspread without getting under the covers. I kept my shoes beside the bed. I also kept my keys in my hand for a few minutes before putting them under the pillow. I fell asleep anyway. That's the part that bothers me. My body just shut down. No matter how unsettled I felt, I couldn't stay awake. I woke up once when my phone rang. It was the tow truck driver. He said he was about 30 minutes out. I checked the time. It was 2:17 in the afternoon. I told him the car was in front of room 6 and that I was inside. He said he'd knock when he arrived. I must have fallen asleep again right after hanging up, because the next thing I remember was pounding on the door. Not hard, just 2 firm knocks. I got up too fast and felt lightheaded. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a yellow reflective vest standing next to the tow truck. I opened the door with the chain still on, confirmed his name, then stepped outside. He looked at the car and said the radiator hose had split near the clamp. He could tow it, but he also said there was a parts store about 15 miles away, and if I wanted, he could try a temporary fix to get it to the shop. I told him to tow it. I didn't trust a temporary fix after the day I'd had. While he was loading the car, I called my sister. No answer. I texted her. Then I called a local repair shop, and the tow driver talked to them for me because he knew the owner. They agreed to take the car and look at it the next morning. By the time everything was done, it was almost 4. The tow driver left with my car, and I was suddenly standing in front of a motel room with no transportation. My sister finally called back around 5. She was still at work and couldn't come until after 9. It was going to be at least a 90-minute drive for her each way. I told her not to. I said I had already paid for the room and I could sleep there, then figure out the car in the morning. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. I wish I had said no. After that, I went to the office to ask if there was anywhere nearby to get food. The same man was at the desk, watching a small TV mounted in the corner. He said there was a gas station about a quarter-mile down the road, but if I didn't have a car, I probably shouldn't walk after dark because there was no sidewalk. Then he looked at me for a second and said he had a few frozen dinners in the office freezer if I wanted one. It was a kind offer, or at least it seemed kind at the time. I bought a microwavable lasagna from him for $4 and carried it back to the room. I heated it in the microwave and ate maybe half of it while sitting at the little table by the window. Outside, the sky got dark without much color. The parking lot lights came on. One of them buzzed. Room 10's pickup was gone. A different car had pulled in near room 3. I remember feeling better after eating. Not good, but more steady. I took a shower. I didn't want to, but I felt like I still had the hospital on me. That mix of sweat, sanitizer, and other people's illness. Before I showered, I checked the bathroom window again. Still latched. I checked the bathroom door. It was a hollow wooden door with a push-button lock on the knob. Nothing unusual. The shower pressure was weak, and the water changed temperature every few seconds. I kept the curtain open a few inches because I didn't like not being able to see the rest of the bathroom. Afterward, I dried off with the clean towel and put on sweatpants and an old t-shirt from my bag. I noticed the damp towel I had put on the floor earlier was gone. For a moment I thought I was confused. I looked around the bathroom. It wasn't on the floor. It wasn't in the tub. It wasn't behind the door. Then I saw it, back on the rack. Folded. Not perfectly, the same way as before. Slightly uneven edges not lined up. I stood there in the bathroom with wet hair dripping down the back of my shirt. I had no memory of picking it up. I knew I hadn't. I am not someone who sleepwalks. I was awake. I had placed it on the floor with the intention of not using it. Then later, after a shower, it was back on the rack. That was when I called the office. The phone in the room didn't work. I picked it up and there was no dial tone. So I used my cell. The number was printed on the paper sleeve around the room key. It rang 6 or 7 times before the desk clerk answered. I told him I was in room 6 and asked if housekeeping had come in while I was outside with the tow driver. He said no. I asked if anyone else had access to the room. He paused, then said only him and housekeeping. I said, "Are you sure?" He asked if there was a problem. I almost told him everything. The towel, the charger, the water bottle. But as soon as I pictured saying it, I stopped. Instead, I said the room phone didn't work. He said he'd make a note of it. I asked if I could switch rooms. He said they were full. That was a lie. I had seen the parking lot. There were not enough cars for the motel to be full. But I also know small places keep rooms closed for repairs, or weekly tenants, or whatever else. I didn't push it. I said okay and hung up. Then I shoved one of the chairs under the door handle. It was not a strong chair. It was a light wooden chair with a padded seat, and the angle wasn't right, but it made me feel slightly better. I put my backpack against the wall beside the bed. I put my shoes on the floor facing the door. I kept my phone plugged in, but close enough that I could reach it. The charger behind the nightstand was still there. I looked at it for a long time. Then I pulled the nightstand forward just enough to see behind it. There was dust along the baseboard, a candy wrapper, the white charger cord, and something else. A folded paper napkin. I used my foot to move it out. There was writing on it in blue pen. Not a note exactly, just numbers. 61030, 6 minus 115, 6 minus 300. Below that, a word I couldn't read. It might have been out. It might have been someone's initials. I didn't touch it with my hands. I took a picture of it. Then I stood up and felt very calm in a way that didn't feel good. I work in healthcare. There are moments when something bad is happening and your brain becomes very organized. You stop reacting and start doing small tasks. I took my backpack and put everything important inside it. Wallet, keys, work badge, medication, phone charger. I put my shoes on. Then I called my sister and told her I changed my mind. I told her I needed her to come get me. She could hear something in my voice and didn't argue. She said she'd leave right away. It was 10:42 p.m. That meant she wouldn't get there until after midnight. I considered calling the police, but I didn't know what to say. Someone had maybe been in my room, or maybe staff had moved a towel. Or maybe I was sleep-deprived and making connections that weren't there. I decided I would stay awake with the lights on until my sister arrived. I turned on the TV for noise. Some rerun of a home renovation show was playing. I sat on the bed closest to the door, back against the headboard, backpack beside me. I kept looking at the bathroom. The door was open. I wanted it open. From where I sat, I could see the sink area and part of the bathroom floor. Not the toilet, not the tub, just the doorway. Around midnight, my sister texted that she was about 40 minutes away. I told her I'd meet her outside when she pulled in. Then, sometime after that, I fell asleep. I don't remember deciding to close my eyes. I don't remember lying down. I only remember waking up with the TV still on and the room lights still bright. My phone said 3:03 a.m. At first, I thought I had woken because of the TV. Then I heard a soft sound from the bathroom. Not a crash, not a voice, just a small shift. Like weight moving on tile. I stayed still. The bathroom door had been open when I fell asleep. Now it was halfway open. I watched it from the bed. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the door moved, slowly. It eased inward, toward the frame, closing from inside the bathroom. There was no draft. The air conditioner was off. The room was still. The bathroom door moved 1 inch, maybe 2, then stopped. I could see the edge of someone's fingers around the inside of the door. Not the whole hand, just fingertips. Pale, pressed flat to the wood. I did not scream. I think that surprises people when I tell them. But I didn't. My throat felt locked. I had the same feeling I get when a patient suddenly stops breathing and the room goes quiet before everyone starts moving. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up too bright in my hand. I had missed 3 calls from my sister. There were also 2 texts. Here? Are you coming out? The bathroom door opened again slightly. The fingertips disappeared. I got up. I moved slowly because I was afraid that if I moved fast, whoever was in there would move fast too. I grabbed my backpack, took the chair away from the door with one hand, and opened the deadbolt. The chain made a sound when I slid it out. From the bathroom I heard breathing. Not heavy, not exaggerated, just someone trying to be quiet and not quite managing it. I opened the door and stepped outside. My sister's car was parked directly in front of the room with the engine running. She was sitting in the driver's seat, looking annoyed and worried at the same time. When she saw my face, she stopped being annoyed. I shut the motel room door behind me but did not lock it. I got in her car and said, "Drive." She asked what happened. I said, "Please drive." She pulled out of the lot. Only when we were on the road did I tell her. She wanted to call the police immediately. I told her to wait until we got to the gas station because I didn't want to sit in the motel parking lot while we explained it. At the gas station, under bright lights with a clerk behind bulletproof glass watching us, I called 911. 2 deputies met us there. They were polite. They listened. One of them asked how much sleep I'd had, not in a cruel way. It was a fair question. I told him the truth. The other deputy took the motel key from me and drove back to the motel while we waited. He came back about 20 minutes later. He said there was no one in the room. He said the bathroom window was locked. He said the front desk clerk claimed nobody else had been in the room and that I had probably been overtired and frightened by the door moving because of uneven air pressure. I asked about the towel. He didn't answer that directly. I asked about the napkin with the times written on it. He said he didn't see any napkin. That bothered me more than anything else. I still had the picture on my phone. I showed him. He looked at it and said it was hard to tell where it had been taken. That was true. It was just a picture of a napkin on carpet. I asked if he had checked behind the nightstand. He said yes. He said there was nothing there. No charger, no napkin, no water bottle in the trash. I remember looking at my sister when he said that. She looked angry, but also scared in a way I had almost never seen. The deputies offered to escort us back so I could get anything I left behind. I told them I had everything. They told me to call if I remembered anything else. That was it. The next morning, the repair shop called and said the car needed a radiator hose and coolant flush. They could have it ready by the afternoon. My sister drove me there. I didn't want to go near the motel again, but the repair shop was only 5 minutes away. While we waited for the car, I called the motel and asked to speak to the manager. The same man answered. I recognized his voice right away. I said I had stayed in room 6 and left in the middle of the night. He said, "You left the key in the room." I hadn't told him that. I asked him if the police had talked to him. He said yes, and that they didn't find anything. Then he said something I still think about. He said, "That room gives people trouble sometimes." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer. I said, "Was someone in there?" He said no one was supposed to be. Then he hung up. I reported the charge to my bank and wrote a review that was probably too vague to help anyone. I said the room didn't feel secure and that management was evasive when asked about it. The review disappeared a week later. I checked. I don't know if they removed it or if the site filtered it. A few months after it happened, I searched for the motel online again. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe complaints, maybe news, maybe someone else saying something similar. The listing was still there, but the photos had changed. The old sign was gone. The motel had a new name. In the new photos, room 6's door was painted blue. I zoomed in on the picture of the front of the building. I could see the bathroom windows above the rooms. Small rectangles of frosted glass, all in a row. Every room had one, but room 6 had something the others didn't. Below the bathroom window, almost at ground level, there was a small metal service panel. It was painted the same color as the wall, so you'd miss it if you weren't looking closely. I don't know what it was for. Plumbing, maybe. Electrical. Access to pipes behind the bathrooms. I'm not saying someone came through it. I don't even know if that would be possible, but I think about the fact that the bathroom window was locked from the inside. I think about the towel being moved while I was alone in the room. I think about the phone charger disappearing before the deputy got there. And I think about those numbers on the napkin. 6:10:30, 6 minus 1:15, 6 minus 3 hodge. I don't know if they were times someone planned to check the room. I don't know if they were times someone had used it before. I don't know if the front desk clerk was involved, or scared, or just used to not asking questions. What I do know is that I saw those fingers on the bathroom door. I know I heard someone breathing. And I know that when I stepped outside, my sister had been sitting in front of my room for almost 10 minutes, calling me over and over. She told me later that while she waited, she saw the curtain move. Not the front curtain by the window, the bathroom curtain. A small frosted square of glass above the tub. She said it shifted just enough that she noticed it, like someone inside the bathroom had leaned close to look out.